Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for joining us right now on Morning News Now. Pushback. Lawmakers in Congress threatening to kill the deal to raise the debt ceiling. The bill heads to the House floor today for a full vote, and already lawmakers are ready for a fight.
Ironically, both Democratic and Republican members, I think, struggling with this vote, the same dynamic, but for almost opposite reasons.
We have team coverage this morning with the key hurdle. The bill cleared last night and the challenges still ahead, just days before a potentially catastrophic default. Failure to launch. New this morning, North Korea is vowing to try again after an unsuccessful attempt to launch a spy satellite overnight. Now, neighboring countries are on alert as the U.S. condemns what it calls use of banned ballistic missile technology. We will bring you the latest. Also this morning, devastating diagnosis for former First Lady Carter. The beloved wife of former President Jimmy Carter is battling dementia. What we know about this morning about her condition. And teaching Tagalog. It's one of the most spoken languages in the U.S. Now, one Ivy League university is offering its first ever classes on Tagalog. More on the course that's being offered this fall and why the language represents much more for Filipino Americans. We're so happy to have you with us this morning. Happy to be with you.
Good to be together.
I know, right? Back after vacation, holidays, all kinds of stuff. We begin this morning with that critical debt ceiling deal clearing its first hurdle in Congress.
This was the first test for the deal that was reached by President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy. The House Rules Committee narrowly passed it by a 7-6 vote. Now it goes to the full House for a vote later today, and its fate there is still very much up in the air. It needs a majority of the House to pass and will likely need some Democratic votes to get through. Some hardline Republicans, they're blasting the bill, saying it doesn't cut the budget enough.
Speaker McCarthy had a mandate from the American people. This deal that we've heard about totally fails to deliver on all of it.
Not one Republican should vote for this deal. It is a bad deal. There's going to be a reckoning about what just occurred unless we stop this bill by tomorrow.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale and Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander join us now. Good morning to both of you. Ali, let's start with you. It is called the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and as we just heard, some lawmakers feel it is not fiscally responsible enough. Others say it goes too far. So how are things looking ahead of tonight's vote?
Look, you're right to say that it's up in the air, mostly because we just don't know how the vote is going to come together tonight. Yesterday, you're right that it cleared one of the first procedural hurdles that it needed out of the Rules Committee. Typically, that's not a committee that's very dramatic, but most of us were glued to its proceedings yesterday because, of course, that's how Congress works these days, but also because there could have been some fireworks there if McCarthy didn't get some key conservatives on his side. Ultimately, he was able to do that. And look, there's a very loud group of Republicans saying how much they hate what's in this bill. You played some of them yesterday, and I was outside with them during that press conference. They are not happy with some of the things that they see in this, but that ire is equally matched by some progressives on the Democratic side. I do think, though, and we've been saying this all along throughout these negotiations, that once you start losing people on each side of the political equation, that's where you knew that a deal was close, because this was always going to be bipartisan. A lot of these folks on the ultra left and ultra right were probably never going to vote for it anyway. Nevertheless, we're watching McCarthy now have to try to sell this to his conference. And as you heard, many of them just aren't happy about it.
So, Peter, let's talk about the ultra left. Progressive Democrats have been raising concerns about some of the concessions President Biden made, especially when it comes to these new work requirements for some people who are on food stamps. What's the president saying to his party?
Well, the president's argument is that this will avoid a default. He says that all sides have agreed the default has to be off the table right now. As it relates specifically to those work requirements, we heard from the budget director, Shalonda Young, who came to the White House just yesterday, and she made the argument that this deal is fair. It's a bipartisan deal, which by its very nature, she says, is a compromise. And specific to those work requirements, Joe and Savannah, she said that they did carve out some exemptions for the homeless and for veterans. So it's certainly not what all Democrats want. It's not what most Democrats want, but they say most significantly it does avoid a default, which avoids the economic catastrophe that this White House was concerned about, specifically because many Americans certainly would have blamed the president if Washington wasn't able to figure this out.
So, Allie, looking ahead, if the bill does pass the House, it heads to the Senate. Will the deal face as many challenges there?
Look, I think that once it heads to the Senate, it's not a question of if, but when. And the reason that I say that is because senators can decide to do this as quickly or as slowly as all 100 of them decide to do. We've already seen from several of them that they want to gum this process up. They want to slow it down and make it as procedurally tough as possible, because there are just as many Republicans on the Senate side of this who don't like what they see as on the House side. That being said, it's still just a vocal minority. As we're doing our unofficial whip count, we've got no reason to think that this is in danger on the Senate side, at least not yet, especially when you hear the leaders from both parties talking like this. Watch.
House Republicans focused on reaching a bipartisan agreement to put reasonable caps on federal spending.
I commend President Biden and his team for producing a sensible compromise under the most difficult of circumstances.
And look, here's what's fascinating about this as we watch the Republican dynamics, as we shift chambers here. McConnell really did let Speaker McCarthy lead the way on these negotiations, so much so that when they actually whittled down the people who were in the room, you well know this, it was McCarthy allies and the White House going one-on-one trying to hammer out this deal. So watching McConnell then be able to bring along his side of the building is going to be an interesting dynamic, but we know that McCarthy has always had really the tougher task in many ways, not just negotiating this deal, but selling it to a pretty unruly Republican conference.
So, Peter, as the clock ticks down, there's a sense of urgency, also a bit of anxiety. What's the White House's message, just the American people right now who are worried about still the potential for a default?
Well, the White House makes the argument that it did its part here, and now it's in the hands of lawmakers. They feel strongly that this will pass, that it is a compromise, that both sides can say we didn't get everything, but at least we got something here. Certainly for Democrats, the something feels not as big as some progressives want it to be. But the argument that you hear from the White House is that they avoid a default, they avoid the economic catastrophe, the global economy crashing that they were worried about. And retirement accounts, they say, will no longer be in flux. And in the words of the budget director here, will view that as a win any day. Joe, Savannah.
Peter Alexander, Ali Vitale, thank you both.
Well, new this morning, tensions are rising on the Korean Peninsula after North Korea attempted to launch a spy satellite last night. Well, the launch wasn't successful, but these are some of the pieces of it that were recovered in South Korea. This morning, the U.S. and other countries are condemning North Korea for using what they say is banned ballistic missile technology. Here's NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer, who's been following the developments overnight and has the latest.
What we know so far is that North Korea failed to launch its first spy satellite into space. They admitted that it was a problem with the rocket malfunctioning and that they will try a second launch as soon as possible. Now, Pyongyang had already announced earlier that it was going to launch a satellite before June 11th to monitor U.S. military activities. South Korean officials say it appears to have crashed into the sea, and they've recovered what they believe is some of the debris. Now, the launch triggered air raid sirens and alerts across Seoul, where people were getting messages on their cell phones telling them to prepare to evacuate, only to be told 20 minutes later that it was a mistake. So for that time, there was a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion. Japan also issued a warning to residents in Okinawa. Now, the launch has been strongly condemned by U.S. officials. A statement from the National Security Council saying ballistic missile technology was used in a, quote, brazen violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. But it also added, quote, the door has not closed on diplomacy, but Pyongyang must immediately cease its provocative actions. According to the NSC, President Biden and his advisors are assessing the situation, and they are in touch with allies. The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, is already in the region. He's in Japan, where the government last week issued a statement saying it would destroy any North Korean missiles that came into its territory. This satellite is one of several high-tech weapons systems that Kim Jong-un has vowed to introduce, saying it's for North Korea's self-defense. This launch today not failing in ramping up tension again in the region.
All right, Janice, thanks.
This morning, both Kyiv and Moscow are recovering from drone strikes. This is the first time that Moscow's residential areas have experienced attacks since President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine more than a year ago. NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter has more on this drone warfare.
In Moscow, President Putin vowing to retaliate for what he said was a Ukrainian drone attack. The attack, Putin said on TV, was aimed at scaring Russian citizens and hitting residential buildings. In video verified by NBC News, a drone seen flying low over the capital. The Russian Ministry of Defense says they shot down 8 drones. NBC News cannot independently verify that information. The ministry says 2 people were injured and several buildings damaged. And Moscow is pointing the finger directly at Kyiv. An advisor to President Zelensky tells NBC News Ukraine is not directly involved in the attacks in Moscow. Here in Kyiv, the Russian aerial bombardment has been unrelenting. At least 1 person has been killed, several injured just in the last 24 hours. Early this morning, the Ukrainian Air Force says it shot down nearly 30 Russian drones.
Now take a look at all of this debris, and they're actually still throwing debris out of the window, so we can't go any closer. Residents tell us they heard a massive pressurized explosion overnight. Unclear, though, whether that was debris hitting this building or whether it took a direct hit.
Max Chabanov lived on the 12th floor.
I closed my eyes because I thought, well, that's it. That's the end.
And across the capital, a new phase of this war. Sasha lives just behind this building.
Every time when we hear explosion, my body is shaking, my voice is shaking.
It feels really different in the capital now. It's been a terrifying few days, and what we're seeing is tens of thousands of Kyiv residents are seeking shelter in the subway. Those are scenes that we haven't seen in months.
Okay, well, NBC News is learning new details about how Russia is allegedly funding its war with Ukraine. It starts with the private army known as the Wagner Group. Sources tell NBC News the 4 hired troops are extracting resources from the Central African Republic and selling them for top dollar. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has the details.
The Central African Republic is a failed state, torn apart by civil war. The infant mortality rate is the 3rd worst in the world, and it's heartbreaking to witness. In the capital, Bangui, I saw children starving to death. At the only pediatric hospital, they filled room after room.
What's it like for you, as the director here, to see all these cases?
It upsets me, she says. Mothers don't have money to buy food, and the children fall into this state. They are victims of Africa's resource curse. The people are poor, despite living on land with vast, untapped wealth. Here, it's gold and diamonds. But instead of lifting people out of poverty, the riches flow into the hands of Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group, Russia's private army, known for its brutality in Ukraine. Wagner's leader is Yevgeny Prigozhin, President Putin's former caterer turned commander. In Ukraine, Wagner fights for the Kremlin. It makes its money here. According to 2 Western diplomats in Bangui, Wagner is extracting $500 million a year in gold, rare timber, and blood diamonds. This woman, who asked us to conceal her identity for her protection, lived in the village of Ndasima, where her husband was a gold miner. She told me how Russian mercenaries arrived, armed and in vehicles, and ordered the villagers to leave.
They were beating people, whipping people, and chasing them away.
When her husband and 7 others refused to go, they were executed.
What do you think the Russians wanted? Gold? You think it's as simple as that?
Yes, they came for our wealth and for our gold. Today, my children don't have a father. They don't have anything at all.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much for telling us. I know it's very difficult. Thank you.
The independent research group Sentry provided NBC News with more than a dozen witness accounts of violence by Wagner forces near the Ndasima gold mine and other mine sites. This was Ndasima in 2019, before the Russian takeover. An image taken this month shows the mine has expanded dramatically. Analysts say it is now generating untraceable profits for Wagner. Wagner was invited into the Central African Republic by the government to help crush a rebellion. And it worked. The capital is now far more secure. Wagner made a movie about its military campaign called The Tourist, showing its men defeating the rebels and saving the day. It was a hit and helped make Wagner popular.
Do you think it's true, or do you think it's propaganda?
It's all true. It's history, he says. There's a statue honoring Wagner on Bangi's main boulevard. The group even provides the personal security for the president.
Mr. President, it's a real pleasure. Richard Engel, thank you very much. You've said quite famously that if your house is on fire, you don't care what color the water is. So I understand why you reached out and you accepted Russian help. Are you happy with it?
You journalists are here. You should ask this question to the Central African people. They will answer you. I am here to make sure that this population is protected.
The government depends on Wagner for its survival. Wagner pays itself in gold. The people are left starving. We reached out to Prigozhin, and he responded with a voice note, calling our questions provocative and saying in part, quote, "You've received enough information. If by asking these questions you intended just to spit at me, then I suggest you come closer. And after that, try to figure out if it's your throat in my hands or someone else's." Richard Engel, NBC News.
All right, thanks, Richard.
Back here at home, there is an outpouring of support for former First Lady Rosalynn Carter. The Carter Center announced yesterday that the 95-year-old is now battling dementia. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has the details.
Well, the Carters have been by each other's side for decades. They're set to celebrate their 77th wedding anniversary this July. They currently hold the record for being the longest married presidential couple in this country's history. And of course, news of her diagnosis has so many people looking back at her lasting legacy. Former First Lady Rosalynn Carter is known as much for her work outside the White House as her time in it. Family reveals she is facing a new health battle. At age 95, she has been diagnosed with dementia. In a statement, her family writes she continues to live happily at home with her husband, enjoying spring in Plains, Georgia, and visits with loved ones. It comes just 3 months after President Carter entered hospice care, announcing he will forego further medical treatment. The White House says President Biden has been in touch with the former first couple's team in recent months and wishes them well. A fierce mental health advocate, Rosalynn Carter and her husband co-founded the Carter Center, spending decades doing humanitarian work around the world.
His belief in her passion on mental health issues and making sure that people really, that their human rights were afforded the ability to have these issues addressed was part of the love story.
And the Carter family says they are sharing news of her diagnosis in part to help further that mission, saying they hope it leads to more conversations to help break the stigma around the illness. Back to you.
All right, Blaine, thank you.
Well, pull out your umbrellas because we might be getting some stormy weather. Let's check your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Angie Lassman joins us with the forecast. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. We got a couple trouble spots, and it does include some of that stormy weather you mentioned. The umbrellas are going to go a long way, not just today, but for the next couple of days, especially if you live in the state of Florida. We've got multiple rounds of rain headed your way. We've also got some stronger storms that could develop across parts of the plains. So let's talk about the plains first. This is the area that you see in that bright yellow that has the greatest chance to see some of those hazards developing. The hazards include the potential for some of those stronger wind gusts, maybe 60 miles per hour or higher. We'll also see the potential for some large hail, and we, of course, can't rule out an isolated tornado in that area. This is this afternoon and into the evening hours. So make sure, even as the sun goes down, if you live in this area, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, you're going to be dealing with the potential for some of those storms to fire up. We'll also have heavy amounts of rain associated with this. So when you see anywhere from 1 inch to maybe 2 inches and isolated amounts higher than that, we know that there will be the potential also for flooding. That does include the greatest amounts falling in parts of, again, the northern portions of Oklahoma, or rather the northern portions of Texas, in the panhandle of Oklahoma, and into parts of Kansas. So watch for that. Let's go to Florida now. I mentioned that we have multiple rounds of heavy rain, and we do have an area that we're watching in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll show you it here in a moment. But this is what we're expecting as far as rain totals here by the time we get through Friday. So by the end of the week, we could see upwards of maybe 5 inches or higher across the state. A lot of that where you see the brighter reds, that's the 2 to 3 inches kind of range, still ample amounts of rain. And we know, especially in places like South Florida, there's some issues when it comes to a lot of rain falling at once. So we will watch for, once again, the flooding concerns there. This is the area that we're watching. Doesn't look like much, right? Well, it's pretty unorganized at this point. Doesn't have a great chance of developing, but that's not really the point with this. What is the point is that we'll see that heavy rain kind of still drifting onshore for folks in the state of Florida, and we'll see the unsettled weather sticking around for multiple days. If it does develop, it'll happen in this big red kind of area. That's the development zone that we're watching for. But again, either way, the gusty winds, the heavy rain, all on the table for folks there as we get through the end of the week and into the weekend. Let's talk about how it feels like summer. Boy, these temperatures are pretty impressive, huh? Minneapolis, 90 degrees today. You're running 15 degrees above normal for this time of year. St. Louis at 90, Buffalo at 87, Detroit 87 degrees later this afternoon too, and the 90s across the board for a lot of people here as we get into the late part of our work week. Thursday, Friday into the 90s for St. Louis. You hit 95 on Saturday, so feeling like summer in a lot of spots. Washington, D.C. ends up into the 90s as well. One note, while it is nice in a lot of those places that I mentioned, we do have some fires that are burning in parts of Canada, so you might notice, especially in the Northeast, places like Philly, Atlantic City, we've got some hazy skies, and it does include some air quality alerts, sensitive populations. Just be careful of this. I would not do as much of that physical activity outside if you can limit it. This should be out of the picture here in the next couple of days, but you'll notice, again, hazy conditions with that sunshine.
All right.
Thank you so much, Angie.
Coming up, if you suffer from migraines, relief could soon just be a spray away. Later this hour, what we're learning about a new kind of treatment that's showing promising results.
But up first, new this morning, the video showing a close call with a Chinese jet. This morning, the Pentagon is calling out China for what it calls an aggressive maneuver. This is Morning News Now.
We're back with the latest on those wildfires still burning in Canada, which Angie mentioned just a moment ago. Firefighters are working around the clock to bring those flames under control.
As you can see here, tens of thousands of acres across Nova Scotia have been burned, forcing thousands to evacuate. This same region has already seen more wildfires recently than all of last year. Here's NBC News correspondent Valerie Castro with more.
Firefighters in Nova Scotia, Canada, battling a raging wildfire that has forced more than 16,000 people to evacuate along routes like this. This dashboard cam video showing extreme lack of visibility, sparks flying, and forests burning all around the road, almost causing a crash. Go. Government officials saying nearly 2,000 acres have been affected so far in the Halifax region alone and declaring a state of emergency. Hotspots and areas of open flame have been extinguished, but fire officials say reburn is still a dangerous possibility.
Those fuels that are left from the original time when the fire passed through are now 100% cured and they are ready to burn.
The wildfire causing a massive smoke cloud to form over the port city. Smoke impacting air quality south of the border too, as far away as Connecticut.
Folks who are vulnerable or may have respiratory disease have to be very, very careful.
As of Monday, 200 firefighters have been working to put the fire out in the Halifax region, but officials say resources have been spread thinner due to other outbursts across Canada, like the massive Barrington Lake fire just a few hours south and the Bocabec fire in New Brunswick.
There is a shortage of firefighters. This is a bad fire season, not only for Nova Scotia, but for Canada in general.
The massive blazes out east coming as Western and Central Canada have also reeled with hellish fires since early May. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calling the wildfire situation in Nova Scotia incredibly serious and that he is ready to provide any federal support needed. No deaths have been reported, but as images like this continue to fuel worry, officials are urging evacuees to stay away from the impacted area. Valerie Castro, NBC News.
Let's stay on international news now. U.S. officials say a Chinese fighter jet flew directly in front of a U.S. spy plane over the South China Sea.
NBC's Claudio Lavaga joins us from Rome with that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, guys. The Pentagon called it an unnecessarily aggressive maneuver. Now, officials released the video of the encounter from Saturday, saying the military plane was conducting routine operations in international airspace in accordance with international law. China accused the U.S. of endangering its national security with its military operations in the region, saying they will take necessary measures. A U.S. spokesperson said that concerns about the interaction will be addressed through the appropriate diplomatic and military channels. And let's go to Kosovo, where NATO will send 700 more troops as unrest in the region continues to intensify. More violence follows on Tuesday, where some 30 NATO peacekeeping soldiers were injured during the latest clashes with ethnic Serb protesters. NATO has also put another battalion on high alert in case additional troops are needed. And we end in Jordan, where celebrations leading up to the kingdom's first major royal wedding in years are taking place. Crowned Prince Hussein is set to marry Saudi architect Rajwa Al Saif on Thursday. To celebrate, several thousand Jordanians cheered and waved flags during a free concert in the capital, guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Claudio. Well, coming up, final steps of freedom. Disgraced tech CEO Elizabeth Holmes is waking up behind bars this morning. More on the high-profile prison where she'll serve her 11-year sentence for fraud.
And working out to work off pain. The new research that shows daily exercise can have long-term benefits for chronic pain. That's next on Morning News Now.
We're back now with the latest on disgraced Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes. This morning, she is waking up in a Texas prison. The 39-year-old began her 11-year sentence yesterday after being convicted of defrauding investors out of millions of dollars. CNBC's Yasmin Karam has the story.
Elizabeth Holmes taking her last steps of freedom, looking back as her partner and parents wave goodbye and blow kisses her way.
There goes Elizabeth Holmes.
Holmes reporting for her 11-year sentence after being found guilty last January of 4 counts of wire fraud in connection to the now infamous blood testing scam in her company, Theranos.
She was going to herald a revolution in medical.
Good luck, Elizabeth.
Holmes has made multiple attempts to stay out of prison while she tries to overturn the conviction, but her latest bids were rejected. She entered the minimum security federal women's prison camp located in Bryan, Texas, leaving behind 2 children, the youngest just 3 months. Inside the prison, she'll be living in dormitory-style housing with roommates and have to swap her signature black turtlenecks for a khaki uniform. The prison, nicknamed Club Fed, is where many celebrities have served time, including Martha Stewart, and currently it also houses Real Housewife Jen Shah. But it's a far cry from the lavish life she lived in California. The disgraced founder and CEO of Theranos was once considered by some to be the face of a new age of technology.
First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
She famously dropped out of Stanford to build Theranos into a darling of Silicon Valley that at one point was valued at more than $9 billion.
What do you dream for? That less people have to say goodbye too soon to people they love.
Falsely claiming that with just 1 drop of blood, her technology could run hundreds of blood tests. Forbes even naming her the youngest female self-made billionaire with a net worth of $4.5 billion. But that's the former face of the future, now the face of fraud. Holmes was convicted of deceiving investors for more than $900 million. Both she and her ex-boyfriend and former top executive Sunny Balwani have been ordered to pay more than $450 million back to investors such as Rupert Murdoch and Betsy DeVos, who were impacted by her failed blood testing company.
She thought that she couldn't be held accountable, that she thought that she could tell investors anything, that she could tell institutions and financial agencies whatever she wanted to and not be held accountable. And that's just false.
The once billionaire will spend the first 90 days of her sentence working in the prison kitchen for 12 to 40 cents per hour.
Our thanks to Yasmin Karam for that report. While Holmes' former partner is currently serving a 13-year prison sentence for federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud charges.
A missing Tennessee woman who had been the subject of a massive days-long search has been found safe in California. 33-year-old Nikki Alcaraz was reported missing 3 weeks ago after reportedly getting into a fight with her boyfriend in New Mexico. The two were on a trip from Tennessee to California to visit her family. Investigators have not released a lot of information other than to say that Alcaraz is safe and that the boyfriend, Tyler Stratton, has been arrested. He does have an unrelated arrest warrant out for him in Tennessee tied to a theft charge.
Well, now it is time for our weekly checkup, and we have some new details on a nasal spray that could help people who suffer from migraines.
Plus, hitting the gym may have more benefits than you think. I mean, we already thought it had a lot of benefits. We're going to explain why lifting weights might actually help people with chronic pain. NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel joins us to break down these headlines. Dr. Patel, good to have you with us. So let's talk about ketamine. It's being embraced by some doctors when traditional treatment for chronic migraines falls short. A new study suggests it could help with relieving some of those more debilitating symptoms. So walk us through how this works.
Yeah, Joe, this is a study of over 169 participants in Philadelphia, and they really looked at the worst cases of migraines. These are people who have tried other things and failed, what we call kind of acute chronic refractory migraines, people who need to end up in the emergency room. They're so desperate. And this was using ketamine. Ketamine is a well-known anesthesia agent, which we're used to giving by IVs, but this was formulated to be given nasally, and it worked. It helped these people overcome their chronic migraines. People said they only needed to use it about 6 times in a 30-day period. That's far less than they were using other medications. So it's a promising signal building on an already promising set of medications that we can use in migraines. So something to keep an eye out for. And here are the doctor's orders. Ask about your options. A lot of people with chronic migraines end up in an emergency room and they feel like they have no options. Ask about your options wherever you are, but then also be careful about overuse. This isn't something that you can just kind of roll up and take. It's something to be discussed. Not all doctors are familiar with prescribing it, and there are some side effects that could happen with overuse, but good news for migraine sufferers.
Yeah, absolutely. I've suffered from them since middle school, not to that level exactly, but whenever there's new information here, it's just so exciting to hear about because they're just so debilitating sometimes. Doctor, this next study, as Joe said, might give you another reason to try to get in that daily workout, even though obviously we know there are a lot of reasons, even though it's tough sometimes to make yourself get there. Tell us what researchers in Norway found about this kind of helping with chronic pain.
All right, so this was one of the more interesting studies, and I'll walk through why. This was over 12,000 adults in Norway, and they measured them at different periods of time over about 7 to 8 years. And what they were looking for was their levels of physical activity and their pain tolerance. And Savannah, here's what's unusual. They took their levels of activity, everything from just sitting on the couch, what we would call sedentary activity, so all comers, all the way to people who were incredibly active at different points in time. What they essentially found following these people over 8 years was that if you were very active to start with and you continued that activity, that you had a higher pain tolerance. Here's the kicker. How did they check for pain tolerance? They submerged a relaxed hand into 3 degrees of Celsius. If you're wondering how cold that is, that's just a shade above turning to ice. And the people who were very physically active at all their points in time across these years were able to keep their hands submerged in cold water here. So here are the doctor's orders. First thing I have to say, do not do this at home. I do not want to see this on TikTok. This was a controlled experiment and something that should be done under scientific supervision, but it does point to the fact that pain prevention is potentially possible and that even just a little activity. So Savannah, what was interesting is that even people who were sedentary, sitting around, not doing much, but then put some activity in place over several years, had better pain tolerance than people who never did anything. So just a little bit, just do it.
That is cool, but don't try that at home. All right, we got to quickly get through this last one. We've been talking so much about the mental health crisis among kids and teens. A new study suggests volunteering may help. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, very quickly. This looked at younger and older children, monitored them with self-reported surveys of different types of volunteering activities, everything from the community to the school and things that people might do with their families. What they found was really startling. Over 50,000 children in total. They found that really if you actually did some element of volunteering, even minimal volunteering, that it helped to reduce anxiety in younger teens. And that's a very important key demographic where we're seeing a lot of anxiety. And then for children, younger children overall, it helped improve other health outcomes. Bottom line, caring for others is self-care and start small. Even you can do it at an individual level.
Very cool. Some good advice.
Great advice.
Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much.
Always good to see you. Well, coming up on Morning News Now, an all but lost language now getting Ivy League attention.
Up next on this final day of AAPI Heritage Month, what's behind Harvard's first ever courses in Tagalog and what learning the language means for so many Filipino Americans. We're back back now with financial headlines, starting with the latest on Elon Musk's trip to Beijing.
CNBC's Silvana Hanau joins us with that and other money news this morning. Hey, Silvana.
Hey guys, good morning to you. Yeah, so Tesla CEO Elon Musk is continuing his visit to China, his first trip to the country in more than 3 years. Now, Musk met with China's commerce minister today, who promised the government will support the development of foreign companies. Musk also discussed electric and intelligent networked vehicles with the industry minister. China accounts for half of global EV sales and is the site of Tesla's largest assembly plant. Apple's annual developers conference kicks off next Monday, with the company expected to unveil its much anticipated mixed reality headset. Bloomberg reports that Apple will also introduce several new Macs, and rumors have teased a new 15-inch MacBook Air for a while. And 9to5Mac reports that Apple is working on new 13 and 15-inch models with the company's very own processing chip. The last time these laptops were updated was a year ago. A group of Amazon workers upset over recent layoffs and a return to the office mandate are planning a walkout at the company's Seattle headquarters today. The lunchtime protest comes a week after Amazon's annual shareholders meeting and a month after rules took effect requiring corporate workers to be in the office 3 days a week. As of last night, more than 1,800 employees had pledged to walk out around the world, with about 870 of those in Seattle, guys.
A lot of Amazon workers there in Seattle. All right, Silvana, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, today is the final day of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we're focusing on one of the most spoken languages in the United States outside of English.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Tagalog is the fourth most spoken language in the country. Nearly 1.8 million people speak the language at home, and now for the first time, Harvard will offer a course in Tagalog starting in the new school year. For more, we are joined by professor in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations at Harvard, James Robson. We're also joined by the co-president of the Harvard Philippine Forum, Jose Marky Antonio. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. I mean, James, let's start with you. Explain to us how this new class came to be. What's behind it?
Great. Well, good morning to you. Well, this was really a fortuitous coming together of a number of things. The Harvard Asia Center, which I direct, had identified Southeast Asia as an important area of focus at Harvard and started an initiative about 3 or 4 years ago, and looked around Harvard at the various strengths and found that Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines were areas of faculty strength. And so we started an initiative and decided to begin with languages because that's the foundation for understanding any culture. And it also dovetailed with an initiative at Harvard for Asian American Studies. And so once we started that, this was around the same time that there was a lot of student advocacy for the teaching of Filipino languages at Harvard. And so these came together. We were able to convince the administration of the importance of the Philippines going forward. And we were able to get these positions along with the position in Filipino languages, along with Thai and Indonesian as well.
Wow. Marky, let's bring you in here. Also, just tell us, I mean, this course, it was announced back in March. What's the reaction been like?
So first of all, I'm glad to be here. The reaction is really multifold. There are many perspectives. For the Filipino community back home, it's been a lot of joy and accomplishment. It really paves the way, I believe, for increased engagement between Harvard and the Philippines in terms of scholarship. It's an opportunity for us to, for Harvard and the community here as a whole to better understand the significance of the current and historical significance of the Filipino-American relationship. And for Filipinos, it's a sense of reducing stereotypes associated with our community here in the U.S. But there's also a sense of relief, knowing that the Filipino community here at Harvard is institutionalized in a sense. But for the Harvard community of Filipinos and allies of the Philippines, particularly our donors and those like James who have advocated for this language to be taught, there's a sense of hope because this is really a necessary first step to introducing Filipino culture and history and the teaching of it. But there's a sense of hesitation as well, in that we really need to get it right and that we need to take care not to misrepresent Filipinos and our culture.
Such an important point there. So, Professor, I mean, just days after Harvard announced the new course, then students at Yale began to call for a course in Tagalog as well. What does that say about the potential growth of the language and learning it? What experience do you hope students take away from learning this?
Yes, I think this was really an important step to see. Once we made this commitment, then you realized that there was so much demand at other places. So you had different universities starting to advocate for the language. In addition to all the reasons that have just been mentioned culturally, I think there's also a growing realization of just the importance of Southeast Asia more generally, with Biden making a trip to ASEAN and then to the G20 in Bali this last year. And so, I think Harvard and other institutions of higher education are realizing that if we're going to cultivate the next generation of leaders to understand these other parts of the world, then there needs to be expertise in the teaching of languages. And, it's really the languages that lead into these other interests and topics. In addition to, satisfying the communities that want to learn these languages, it's also then the beginnings to understanding history and culture and geopolitical issues that are going to be very important going forward. So I think that realization has been important, and people see that going into the future.
Absolutely, the wider context there. Marky, you mentioned just a minute ago the joy and accomplishment that this sort of brings to the Filipino-American community, and I liked what you said at the end there about the fact that it's now being institutionalized, kind of putting that out there. Explain how important that is for the community to have this at a school like Harvard, actually on the books as a course.
Yeah, so the Filipino-American community, sort of my experience growing up in the U.S. is really that, with a sense of belonging in the community as a whole, it's sort of hard to fit in as a Filipino because we don't traditionally look like, Asians. We also don't traditionally look like people from other communities as well, and so we're sort of in a sense of alienation. And I think having the community institutionalized for allies of the Philippines, for Filipino Americans, for people who want to learn the language, there's an increased sense of belonging and representation within the campus. But additionally, it also helps us, get in touch with our roots and in touch with a very valuable part of our identity. So it's really amazing for the Harvard Filipino American community for this language to be taught, and I'm also excited for an increased pipeline between the language and the Harvard Philippine Forum and the greater Harvard Filipino clubs, and that will be able to bring people in, especially people coming from the Philippines.
James and Marky, what an amazing thing that you're doing at Harvard, and thank you so much for this conversation to share that this is happening with our viewers. We appreciate you coming this morning.
Great. Thanks for
so much for having us.
Coming up, it is wedding season. Well, most of us know not to wear white. Did you know there are other things you shouldn't do when your loved ones say, I do?
Up next, we'll get the lowdown from an industry expert on the do's, more importantly, the don'ts. You're watching Morning News Now.
Welcome back. The singer Sia is opening up about a recent diagnosis, revealing publicly that she has autism. The pop star, who's famous for not showing her face, made the announcement in a conversation on a recent podcast. She confided that she's on the spectrum and has been dealing with that for most of her life, and that, quote, only in the last 2 years have I become fully myself. In 2021, the singer faced backlash about the film she produced called Music. In the movie, a character with autism was portrayed by a neurotypical actor. Sia later apologized and removed scenes that had sparked the controversy. She says she's now on a healing journey, navigating her recent diagnosis and her past struggles with addiction.
Wow.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is the start of June. That means wedding season.
Well, everyone wants to be the ideal wedding guest, right? But there are plenty of little things that we can all do to potentially interfere with the big day. Let's try.
Sounds nefarious, all right?
Interfering sounds a little dramatic. All right, Gabriella Rello-Duffy, editorial director of Brides, is here with everything you need to know. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Let's just start with some basics. Main do's and don'ts for us here, the wedding guest mistakes we've got to avoid.
Yeah, there are so many ways to be a great wedding guest, but there are also ways to be a not so great wedding guest. So my top tip is to make sure you're looking at that envelope that you received with your invitation and to see whose guests' names are on it. If it is just your name, you do not have a +1, and please, please don't ask the couple. Other things you want to avoid is getting in the way of the photographer. They've paid a lot of money for this person to be there. They don't want your cell phones in their pictures. They don't want you blocking that special first kiss or important toasts. You don't want to rescind your RSVP. You don't want to be late, and you really, really want to be sure you wear the right attire.
And there's one in there you didn't say, watch your drinking. That's a good one too. So
yes.
You talked about this a little bit with the cameras in the shot and the professional photographer, but when it comes to social media, there are rules. I mean, how soon is too soon to actually post pictures on social media?
Yeah, you want to kind of feel it out. So the couple probably wants to announce their wedding to the world. They probably don't want your maybe not perfect photo of them being the one that announces their marriage. So, see how things are going. If you're noticing a lot of other people are posting, it's probably okay. If you have a second with the bride or the groom or, the couple, and you can ask them if they're comfortable with you posting a photo, then that's perfectly fine. But I always say to err on the side of cautiousness. You can post a photo of yourself there. So happy to be celebrating the new Joneses, but not actually share a photo of them.
Don't live stream the wedding.
Yeah, we would love that. Yeah. Okay, quickly, let's talk dress code. This is obviously such a big one, and I think sometimes it's sort of confusing. It seems like it's like just a bunch of adjectives together is the dress code, and you're like, well, what exactly does that mean? Walk us through some of what we should be wearing.
Yeah, so black tie is obviously your most formal. You want to be in, full-length gowns, suits, ties, tuxedos. Everything else is sort of a little bit open for interpretation. So you definitely don't ever want to wear white. I say avoid white with a pattern. Anything that's mostly white is a no. For anything that's cocktail or casual, you can go with a shorter hemline, perhaps no tie or just a jacket. There are kind of flexible options in there, but you just want to make sure you're really appropriate and that you're avoiding white. So you don't want to, potentially wear something too revealing or too showy at someone else's wedding.
That makes a lot of sense. Gabriella Rello-Duffy, thank you so much. Getting us ready for wedding season.
Thank you.
Finally this hour, a 5-year-old North Dakota boy who has Down syndrome is learning that a little pep talk can go a long way.
As NBC News correspondent Zincle Esamoah explains, his nanny is teaching him daily affirmations that are helping him live his best life.
I smart. Yes, you are smart.
Every morning before heading off to school, 5-year-old Cohen Nordine and his nanny Eva Abfalter say these daily affirmations.
Say I am handsome. Yes, you are handsome.
It's been their ritual nearly every day for the past year.
It's not just something he's repeating, but it's something he is actually affirming to himself and making himself believe and putting it out into the world that he is all of those things and so much more.
Eva says she got the idea from TikTok and immediately thought of Cohen, hoping it would support the North Dakota child through his journey with Down syndrome. Before the affirmations, Eva says he was nonverbal and had very limited speech. Eva encouraging him to practice affirmations, keeping the ritual a secret until Cohen felt ready.
Recently, he has just flourished in his speech, and he can say almost all of the words independently.
Now, a year since the practice began, Eva and Cohen surprised his mom, Sarah, with this video.
Good day. You're gonna have a good day. Yes, you are. What else? I am. You're important. Yes, you are.
Showing that consistency and care pay off.
She believes in Cohen as much as, my husband and I and his siblings do.
Eva has nannied for the Nordines just a year and a half. In that time, they say she's become family.
We just trust her so much.
Eva starts grad school in the fall, studying language and speech pathology, and hopes to work with more children like Cohen.
There's so much negativity out there and so many naysayers and people who look at a kid with a disability and think that they're not capable and that they're not smart. And it's really sad.
And Eva says the impact is reciprocal. Cohen's affirmation journey reminding her that anything is possible.
You almost need someone like Cohen in your life to show you that they are just as capable, if not more, of everything that I can do, everything that everyone else can do. They just have to work a little harder.
You're gonna have a good day. Good day.
Zinclair Samoa, NBC News.
Very cool. Love that story. That does it for this hour. Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, obstacles ahead. The debt ceiling bill cleared its first major hurdle yesterday and now faces a vote in the full House today. But with the default deadline fast approaching, serious questions remain if it can pass the House and Senate in time to avoid a financial fallout. We've got the latest on where things stand this morning as President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy make a last-minute push to win over holdouts. Campaign kickoff. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is on the campaign trail for the first time since he made his run for the presidency official last week, and he's ready to take on former President Trump.
I'm going to respond to attacks. I'm going to counterpunch. I'm going to fight back on it.
We'll take a look at how the race for the White House is shaping up 8 months before the critical Iowa caucuses. Burn rate. Bonobos co-founder Andy Dunn is working to remove the stigma around mental health disorders. And this morning, he's opening up about his own struggles. We'll talk to him about how his diagnosis with bipolar disorder affected him during his time as CEO of the menswear brand and how his book on the subject is making an impact. And food for thought. As more kids struggle with eating disorders, experts say parents' eating habits and how they talk about food with their kids can make all the difference. How you can create a positive relationship with food at home. We're going to begin this morning in Washington, where later today the House is expected to vote on the critical bipartisan debt ceiling deal.
That's right. The bill passed a first critical vote yesterday, but time is quickly running out. Lawmakers have just 5 days left to get the bill to the president's desk. If not, the country runs the risk of running out of money to pay its bills, and that would likely lead to a catastrophic economic crisis. NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Hake has the latest.
This bill overcame a key procedural vote late last night, and the full floor vote in the House should come tonight. Members of the far right and the far left have opposed the bill, but President Biden and Speaker McCarthy believe they can push it over the finish line as lawmakers work down to the wire to get something passed that can prevent an historic government default.
This morning, the race is on to round up the votes to avoid an unprecedented government default, now just 5 days away. Some hope on the horizon after the bill cleared a major roadblock overnight. Now, the bipartisan compromise struck by President Biden and Speaker McCarthy headed to the House floor today.
Yes, I'm confident we'll pass the bill.
But the 99-page bill, which suspends the nation's borrowing limit entirely until early 2025 in exchange for spending cuts and other conservative priorities, is running into roadblocks on the right. More than 30 House Republicans say they'll vote against the measure for not cutting spending deeply enough.
Not one Republican should vote for this deal. It is a bad deal.
In a narrowly divided Congress, this means Democrats need to convince their side to get on board, and Republicans can't afford any more defections. But as of now, both sides think the bill will pass the House tonight. If the bill becomes law, student loan payments suspended since 2020 would restart, and work requirements for SNAP benefits would expand, with some carve-outs for veterans. That's a major concern for some progressives, angry and still undecided.
It's not a good bill for the American people.
If the bill clears the House tonight as expected, the Senate can begin their own process to pass it as soon as Thursday, with many senators no more enthusiastic about the prospect than their House counterparts.
Every time you turn over the rock, there's something else slimy under it.
I think the Biden-McCarthy debt deal is a disaster for the country. It does not significantly change the trajectory of the debt.
Any one senator can slow things down to a crawl until their demands are met. And with time really of the essence right now, don't be surprised to see senators from both parties demanding votes on their priorities, too, in exchange for allowing this bill to move ahead of next Monday's deadline. Waiting until the very last minute could have an economic impact of its own, risking downgrading the country's credit rating, which is what happened in 2011 when the debt ceiling bill was passed on the very last day.
All right, Garrett Hake, thank you.
The debt ceiling deal and, above all, the state of the economy will no doubt be major issues in the 2024 presidential campaign. Republican candidate Governor Ron DeSantis talked about the deal during his campaign kickoff event in Iowa yesterday. He says the country is, quote, careening toward bankruptcy. But he saved his harshest criticism for a former ally, the Republican frontrunner, former President Donald Trump. NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins us now from Des Moines, Iowa, with the latest. Gabe, good morning.
Joe, good morning. Governor DeSantis had not gone after former President Trump like he did last night. And now, about 7 months until those critical Iowa caucuses, there is now an all-out brawl for the Republican nomination.
This morning, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is back in Iowa, this time as an official Republican presidential candidate.
I am going to counterpunch. I'm going to fight back.
Now offering his most direct attacks yet at the GOP frontrunner, former President Trump.
I do think, unfortunately, he's decided to move left on some of these issues.
DeSantis responding to new criticism from Mr. Trump, who suggested on social media that New York State handled COVID better than Florida.
He used to say how great Florida was. Hell, his whole family moved to Florida under my governorship. Are you kidding me?
Speaking to a crowd of evangelical voters in suburban Des Moines, DeSantis getting a standing ovation when he brought up his escalating feud with Disney.
We stand for the protection of our children. We will fight those who seek to rob them of their innocence, and on that point, there will be no compromise.
Disney is suing Florida over what it says is retaliation for the company's opposition to the state's Parental Rights in Education Act, which critics labeled the Don't Say Gay law. Just last week, Trump slamming DeSantis' fight with Disney.
And look at Disney and what a mess it is. Could have worked out an easy settlement, but no, he wanted to show the fake news how tough a guy he is.
Mr. Trump now insisting he's not siding with Disney, instead calling the company a woke and disgusting shadow of its former self. Trump is leading DeSantis in national polls by a wide margin, with a recent Monmouth poll suggesting 63% of Republicans think Trump definitely or probably has the best chance against President Biden.
Do you think the governor should be running this time around or not?
I kind of think he should have waited until 28.
DeSantis is well-spoken, and some people don't like that Trump is so outspoken.
Former President Trump is expected here in Iowa later today, and Governor DeSantis will barnstorm not just this state, but also New Hampshire and South Carolina later this week, Joe.
All right, Gabe, thank you so much.
Well, this morning we're finding out new disturbing information about how Russia is funding its war in Ukraine. It starts with the private army known as the Wagner Group, and it also traces back to the continent of Africa and precious natural minerals there. NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel joins us now to break this all down for us. Hi, Richard. Good morning.
Good morning. It is not just about Russian mercenaries funding the war in Ukraine. It's about Russian mercenaries funding themselves. We talk a lot about Russian mercenaries these days from the Wagner Group, and they are leading some of the fighting in Ukraine. But that is not where they make their money. They do that in Africa, especially in the Central African Republic, where they are exploiting the mineral wealth of some of the world's poorest people.
The Central African Republic is a failed state, torn apart by civil war. In the capital, Bangui, I saw children starving to death at the only pediatric hospital.
What's it like for you, as the director here, to see all these cases?
It upsets me, she says. Mothers don't have money to buy food, and the children fall into this state. They are young victims of Africa's resource curse. Desperately poor people living on land with vast untapped wealth. Here, it's gold and diamonds, but they're not lifting people out of poverty. Much of the riches are now flowing to Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group. Russia's private army, known for its brutality in Ukraine. Wagner is led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, President Putin's former caterer turned commander. In Ukraine, Wagner fights for the Kremlin. It makes its money here. According to two Western diplomats, Wagner extracts $500 million a year from this country in gold, rare timber, and blood diamonds. This woman, who asked us to conceal her identity for her protection, lived near the village of Indasima, where her husband was a gold miner. She told me how Russian mercenaries drove the villagers away.
They were beating people, whipping people, and chasing them away.
When her husband and 7 others refused to leave, they were executed.
What do you think the Russians wanted? Gold? You think it's as simple as that?
Yes, they came for our wealth and for our gold. Today, my children don't have a father. They don't have anything at all.
Working with the research group The Century, NBC News reviewed more than a dozen allegations of Wagner violence, including at Indasima. This was Indasima in 2019, before the Russian takeover. An image taken this month shows the mine has expanded dramatically, now capable of generating untraceable profits. Wagner was invited into the Central African Republic by the government to help crush a rebellion. The government quickly became dependent on Russian support. Wagner even provides the personal security for the president.
Mr. President, it's a real pleasure. Richard Engel, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
What do you say about reports that allege that the Russian forces who you brought in to help secure this country have committed abuses?
Listen, we are a responsible government, and there are laws in this country. We have set up a commission of inquiry to see if the facts reported in these reports are true.
The government relies on Wagner to survive. Wagner pays itself in gold. The people are left starving.
We reached out to Prigozhin, and he responded with a voice note calling our questions provocative and saying in part, quote, "You've received enough information. If by asking these questions you intended just to spit at me, then I suggest you come closer. And after that, try to figure out if it's your throat in my hands or someone else's." Savannah?
Richard Engel, thank you very much for your incredible reporting.
Back here in the U.S., the key figure behind one of Silicon Valley's most notorious scams is behind bars.
That's right. Elizabeth Holmes, founder of Theranos, has begun serving an 11-year prison sentence for defrauding investors. NBC News senior national correspondent Stephanie Gosk has more.
Elizabeth Holmes showed up at federal prison Camp Bryan Tuesday dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. The start of her 11-year, 3-month prison sentence.
Our belief.
The 39-year-old, once considered a brilliant entrepreneur on the verge of revolutionizing healthcare with a simple blood test, is now one of hundreds of inmates at this minimum security Texas prison. The dress code, a far cry from her trademark black turtleneck she wore as CEO of the healthcare startup Theranos. Khakis, tops and bottoms, according to the prison handbook. She will work doing jobs that pay at most $1.15 an hour. There is no intranet. Prisoners have a special system for texts. Phone calls are 15 minutes. The mother of 2 small children will get visiting hours on the weekend and on holidays. Holmes had asked the court to stay at home while she appeals her sentence, but the request was denied.
The guilty verdicts in this case reflect Ms. Holmes' culpability in this large-scale investor fraud.
A jury found her guilty of 4 out of 11 charges. Federal prosecutors accusing her of scamming investors out of hundreds of millions with false claims her company developed a cheap and easy blood test. She spoke with Maria Shriver in 2016 as cracks were starting to show at Theranos.
I know what we've built, and I know what we've created, and I know what it means to people, and it is a change that needs to happen in the world.
The company was first exposed by a series of reports in the Wall Street Journal that eventually led to federal charges.
This was a fraud. The technology did not work. It did not have the capabilities that she claimed it had, and she lied to investors and she lied to the public.
The meteoric rise and dramatic fall of Theranos is captured in books, a documentary, and an Emmy-winning drama series.
I put you in charge of operations, and you're going to figure it out.
Elizabeth Holmes' story turned into a cautionary tale for a tech industry desperate to find the next big thing. Theranos did not change the world, but it may have changed Silicon Valley.
Our thanks to Stephanie Gosk for that report. While Holmes is asking for a reduced sentence in her appeal, her legal team says she never intended to scam investors.
Let's bring back meteorologist Angie Lassman for a check on your morning news now. Weather?
Yes, hello, Angie. Good morning.
Hello, hello. Halfway through the work week, and we've got some trouble spots, but we've also got a lot of nice spots across the country, too. Check out west, places like Southern California, you're into the upper 60s, a lot of sunshine there. We have some sunshine in parts of the Northeast, but it is a little hazy. You'll notice that. That's thanks to some of that wildfire smoke that has drifted our way. We'll talk about it in a moment, but we've also got some rain that's falling in places like Texas and Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas. Those are some of the areas that we'll see have the potential to see some of these stronger storms into the afternoon and even evening hours. Meanwhile, in parts of Florida, you guys are going to be in and out of some heavy rain over the next couple of days. We'll talk about that coming up in just a moment. First, we've got to deal with the severe threat that we have through the day today. So New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, into parts of Kansas and Colorado, all going to have the potential to see some strong winds. That could be up to 60 miles per hour or higher. The large hail also on the table. Less likely for us to see a tornado, but we're not going to rule it out. So isolated tornadoes will be out there. I do want to note, though, this will go into the evening hours, too. So after the sun goes down, we always know it gets a little more dangerous when it's dark and we're seeing this severe threat. So watch for that. In addition, you also have some heavy rainfall that you could see in some of those same areas, 1 inch, maybe 2 inches by the time we get through Thursday. So the flooding potential is there for, again, that same kind of area, the parts of Texas, Oklahoma, into New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas. So watch for that. Meanwhile, in Florida, the heavy rain is going to be something that we'll talk about for a couple of days, even through the end of the work week. As the weekend nears, we'll start to see the potential to maybe see upwards of 3 to even 5, even higher than that when it comes to rain totals here as we get through the rest of the week. This is all because we have an area that we're keeping an eye on. It's a potential area that could develop. It has a 20% chance, so not great odds, but it's not zero, that's for sure. It's pretty disorganized right now, and what's going to happen is an extending cold front along with that is going to just usher in a whole lot of moisture and repeated rounds of it for the state of Florida. So whether it develops or not really the biggest problem here. It's going to be the heavy rain that they have to deal with and the flooding concerns that we'll see over the next couple of days. That will also be accompanied by some gusty winds, too. Meanwhile, summer is out in full force in places like Detroit, hitting 87 degrees this afternoon. Minneapolis, you're going to the 90s. And it's not just today, it's tomorrow, it's through the rest of our week and into our weekend. Temperatures into the 90s on Friday in Washington, D.C. A little cooler, but not by much. On Saturday, 87. Cleveland into the mid-80s, guys. It definitely feels like summer. We had the unofficial start of summer over the weekend, and boy.
I'm going to declare it official now.
I know. When is official?
That,
soon, right?
Yes, the summer solstice, late June.
Late June. Yeah.
So enjoy this spring weather we're having here. All right.
Well, I do like when I'm like, oh, good, we still have a while before it even actually starts. It's not going to end anytime soon. Andrew, thank you so much. Well, this morning we are learning that former First Lady Rosalynn Carter, the longtime wife of former President Jimmy Carter, has been diagnosed with dementia.
The news comes after February's announcement that her husband has entered hospice care. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander is in the Carter's home state of Georgia and joins us now with more. Blaine, good morning.
Well, Joe and Savannah, good morning to you both. You know, news of the former First Lady's health has so many people looking back on the Carters' incredible legacy, but you can't talk about that legacy without discussing their love story. And here at the Carter Center, both are often on full display. In fact, they were often seen walking through the halls together hand in hand. Now this morning, so many people are sending their love and their prayers to the former first couple. For more than 7 decades, Rosalynn Carter has been by her husband, former President Jimmy Carter's side through his many political and health battles.
Along came Jimmy Carter, and my life's been an adventure ever since.
Now this morning, her family reveals she is facing a battle of her own. At 95, the former First Lady has been diagnosed with dementia. In a statement, her family says she continues to live happily at home with her husband, enjoying spring in Plains, Georgia, and visits with loved ones. The news comes more than 3 months after her husband, the former president, announced he was entering hospice care at age 98 and would forego any further medical treatment. The news of Mrs. Carter's health triggered an outpouring of well wishes, including from the current first couple.
They are certainly in the president and the first lady's thoughts.
The longest married presidential couple in American history, the Carters are set to celebrate their 77th wedding anniversary in July.
Well, the best thing I ever did was marrying Rosalynn. That's the pinnacle of my life.
They are lifelong partners in everything, from the Georgia governor's mansion to the White House to their global humanitarian work, together founding the Carter Center soon after leaving Washington.
Continuing to bring attention to the important issues of our time is exactly the legacy that the Carters have continued to share with all of us.
Mrs. Carter has long been a fierce advocate for mental health, spending much of her life speaking out on the topic, including right here on Today.
The stigma just exacerbates everything. It humiliates and embarrasses people.
Her family says that helped fuel their decision to make her diagnosis public, writing, "We hope sharing our family's news will increase important conversations at kitchen tables and in doctors' offices around the country." And as for the former president's health, his grandson recently told the Associated Press that former President Carter is still getting regular updates from the Carter Center on their many initiatives. He is seeing and appreciating the outpouring of well wishes that have been flooding in since he entered hospice about 3 months ago. And guys, believe it or not, he even takes time for the occasional ice cream break. The flavor of choice, of course, is peanut butter, a nod to his beginnings as a Georgia peanut farmer. Guys, back to you.
Love that update. All right, Blaine, thank you so much. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar to help explain dementia and put the diagnosis into perspective. Good morning. So we hear the word used a lot to describe a decline in memory, but it's actually several diagnoses, right? Talk more about that.
Well, it is. And I think the name dementia is not exactly a disease in and of itself, but it's kind of like an umbrella term that encompasses a bunch of different diseases that all have in common the symptoms of dementia. Some of the more common ones, of course, Alzheimer's, which is the most common type of dementia, but there are other types. There are frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, and the list goes on. And the other ones are characterized by different accumulations of different proteins that are causing symptoms. Lewy body is very similar to Parkinson's disease. Vascular dementia is really important because that, of course, could be from a massive stroke. It could be from tiny mini strokes or hypertension or heart disease. So a lot of different kinds. But again, Alzheimer's is the one that, of course, most people are familiar with.
So are there other symptoms to be aware of besides what we think of as just kind of that beginning memory loss?
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, we all are aware, of course, of the memory symptoms, but I think a lot of things have to do with speech and language, so difficulty speaking, reading, writing, and then problems with movement. We see more, let's say, with Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's disease, and I think we're all familiar with the concept of people using unusual words to refer to familiar objects. And as I'm looking at this list myself, I'm thinking, does that ever happen to you? It happens to all of us, right? So I just want to point out that dementia is not necessarily a normal part of aging, but there are like age-related cognitive decline that we see. But I don't want people to be alarmed if they say, oh, sometimes I do that. We all do that sometimes.
So how common is dementia? And then also, I mean, is any part of it treatable at all? And what's your advice to loved ones who have someone who are experiencing it?
Exactly. So, well, the biggest risk factor for, let's say, Alzheimer's has to do with age. So in your 60s, it's about 1 in 10 individuals. 65 and older, let's say 1 in 10 individuals may develop Alzheimer's disease. But by the time you hit your 80s or 90s, it's about 35% of people can develop Alzheimer's. Are there treatments? Yes. Well, we spent a lot of time, right, talking about treatments for Alzheimer's and how many of them have now been approved, things that are hopefully going to slow down disease progression. But a lot of the medications that we use to treat dementia really are treating the symptoms, whether there's associated depression, anxiety, and other things like that. But in terms of helping a loved one, yes, we had a graphic up for our viewers, things that you can definitely do, helping, you know, sticking to a routine, maintaining independence for your loved one as much as possible. I think it's hard, but, you know, you can get very frustrated, but try to refrain from saying, why are you doing this? Don't you remember this? And always try to keep engaging your loved one in a conversation. And I think it's always helpful, you know, with dementia, there's a difficulty in creating new memories and things like that. But a lot of times people will still have wonderful memories that are maintained and retained from childhood. So, you know, music that your loved one might have wanted to listen to do that with them, I think can be so meaningful and so special.
The music, people, they just always seem to remember that. It brings back so many memories and the words.
We know for all of us it evokes
Amazing.
so much, but I think especially for your loved one who's, you know, maybe at the you know, later stages, to sort of surround them with things that, you know, bring them happiness and joy is one gift that you can give someone as they're nearing the end.
Oh.
Dr. Azar, thank you so much. Appreciate this.
Thank you. Well, coming up, new warnings this morning about artificial intelligence and its potential impact on the human race. We will tell you what they're saying and why some believe the warning is overhyped.
Also ahead, Uganda's president just signed one of the world's toughest anti-LGBTQ laws, with harsh punishments, including the death penalty. We're going to have more on how President Biden and other world leaders are blasting the law. That's next on Morning News Now. Welcome back. The United States is threatening to punish Uganda after its president signed a new law that targets the LGBTQ community. The law says that gay sex can lead to a life sentence in prison and is possibly even punishable by death. NBC's Josh Letterman has more.
Life in prison, even the death penalty for being gay? In Uganda, that's reality after President Yoweri Museveni signed one of the world's most draconian anti-gay laws, triggering an international backlash, threats of punishment from the U.S., and fears of other African nations following Uganda into an LGBT crackdown.
This is not where I would like to be.
This Ugandan LGBT activist had to flee their country, now living in exile.
You are arresting us for literally doing nothing, for simply existing. You know, but where are we supposed to go? How did we become refugees in our own countries?
The new law punishes gay sex with a life sentence. For the crime of promoting homosexuality, 20 years. It was watered down from an earlier version that criminalized merely identifying as LGBTQ. But this version imposes even harsher penalties for what it calls aggravated homosexuality, same-sex relations involving children, people with HIV, or other vulnerable people.
When you commit aggravated homosexuality, the law says you shall be liable to suffer death. Museveni!
Across the globe, outrage. President Biden calling it shameful. The U.S. saying it will directly impede American aid to Uganda, including in fighting HIV/AIDS.
The enactment of Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act is a tragic violation of human rights, of universal human rights.
Even Republican Senator Ted Cruz, not known as a champion of LGBT rights, calling it grotesque, an abomination, while Secretary of State Antony Blinken threatens visa bans on Ugandan officials. But in Uganda, the law's chief backer brushing off U.S. threats.
Let all of us be subjected. In fact, let all Ugandans be denied visas to America, Canada, and the European Union.
As Ugandan lawyers challenge the law in constitutional court, other African nations may follow Uganda's example. Already, 32 of Africa's 54 nations criminalize homosexuality. Those countries make up nearly half of the 67 countries globally where being gay is a crime. In Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana, there are campaigns underway to replicate the new Ugandan law.
We are delighted to know that Uganda has been able to set the pace. It's a good thing that other countries are also taking up this issue.
Our thanks to Josh Letterman for that reporting.
Now let's get to some more international headlines. Outrage in India after a teen girl is stabbed to death.
NBC's Claudio Lavaga joins us from Rome with that and other world headlines. Claudio, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Yes, the 16-year-old victim was brutally stabbed and killed in a busy neighborhood. Now a surveillance video, which is way too graphic to be shown, shows witnesses passing by, but no one intervened as the attacker repeatedly stabbed the teen against the wall. On Monday, Indian police said they arrested a male suspect. The incident is the latest violence against women in India. Now we head to South America, where Brazilian President Lula da Silva has once again proposed the creation of a common currency. He alleged it will strengthen the South American identity in monetary policy. The currency will apply to the Mercosur trade bloc, which includes Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Analysts are skeptical this could take off anytime soon. And we end up at the world's tallest mountain. An Everest trekking guide, Tenzin Sherpa, said he has gathered around 200 kilograms of trash left behind by visitors. He shared a video on his Instagram showing a campsite full of garbage, adding, "If you don't want to pick up your trash, don't come to the mountain. He's also called out for the government to punish those who leave a mountain of trash behind, guys.
Wow, those are some crazy images there.
No kidding.
Oh my gosh.
Important to pick up that trash everywhere.
Yeah, for real. Claudio, thank you so much. Well, Air New Zealand is posing an interesting question to some of their flyers.
The airline is asking international passengers if they would be willing to step on a scale before they fly. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joined us with more on this weighty topic. Sam, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning. The operative words there you just said, if they would be willing to do this. Guys, the key points here, it's voluntary, it is anonymous. The weight that comes out is not associated with your name. And for New Zealand, this is nothing new. They've been doing it for years. Their version of the FAA says that if they weigh food and cargo crew members, why not calculate the average weight of the typical passenger? And largely, guys, this has been getting a positive response, at least in New Zealand.
For millions of passengers taking to the skies every day, weighing luggage has become about as routine as selecting your seat, picking out a snack, or choosing an in-flight movie.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
But soon, Air New Zealand passengers on international flights will also have the option to hop on the scale themselves before heading to their gate. The airline announcing a new voluntary anonymous survey that's designed to calculate the average weight of passengers over the next month. The goal, they say, is safety.
It's a regulatory requirement for us to know the weight of everything that goes on the aircraft, and there's a good reason for that.
Industry experts say knowing how much everything weighs on board, including fuel, baggage, passengers, and more, helps planes to fly more efficiently while remaining balanced. According to Air New Zealand, the scales in the airport will not display any passenger's weight, and all of the data will be fed directly into a computer and recorded anonymously along with thousands of other passengers. But despite all of that reassurance, some Americans on social media and beyond saying, no scale, no way.
Oh, when will the infernal humiliation of being weighed in public ever end?
I think that's a violation of privacy.
When I go to the doctor, I don't even look at the scales.
When it comes to commercial aviation safety, I want to err on the side of exact measurement, not a guesstimate.
Still, New Zealand says its program has nothing to do with discrimination and everything to do with the science of calculating how many passengers a plane can safely carry.
It's critically important for the safety of flight that you know how much the airplane weighs. It's particularly certificated to perform in a given way at a given weight.
Some experts say the methods and data collected by Air New Zealand could offer wide-ranging benefits around the world.
I think you may see some other airlines utilize this at some point in the future.
Now, interestingly, guys, Air New Zealand did this 20 years ago with 15,000 passengers and found out that the average weight for those 13 and up with their cargo, or I should say with their carry-on bag, is 188 pounds. We'll see what it might be now in 2023. Joe and Savannah?
Sam, dare I ask this? Could we ever see a program like this in America?
Sure, Joe, it's a good question. Many people, no doubt, wondering that. It's possible. Now, the FAA gives broad discretion to domestic airlines to decide how they want to comply with weight and balance requirements. Typically, I'm told by aviation experts, they go to the medical industry to find out what the average weight of people is right now. Could this model be adopted and brought to the United States? Yes, but there's no indication at this point that that's about to happen, guys.
All right, Sam Brock. Sam, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Good to see you. Well, coming up, we're marking the final day of Mental Health Awareness Month with the founder of Bonobos, Andy Dunn.
He's opening up about his own personal struggle with bipolar disorder and how it shaped his business approach. That conversation next. Welcome back. Today is the final day of Mental Health Awareness Month, and we're taking a closer look at how our mental wellness influences really nearly every aspect of our lives.
That's right, yeah. From at home in the living room all the way to at work, the boardroom, nobody's untouched by mental health obstacles. Well, that's the case for Bonobos co-founder Andy Dunn, who revealed his bipolar disorder diagnosis to the world just last year. And we are so happy and fortunate to have Andy Dunn with us here in studio this morning, as we mentioned, co-founder of Bonobos and also the author of this book. It is called Burn Rate, Launching a Startup and Losing My Mind. Thank you very much for joining us in studio this morning. We know the book came out a year ago, paperback now, bestseller list. So first of all, congratulations
Thank
for
you.
that.
Thanks, Savannah.
Very exciting. So let's talk, if you don't mind, which I know that's kind of what you've been doing on this, is sharing and kind of unpacking some of bipolar disorder, because it does feel, and I'm curious if you agree, like it is a pretty stigmatized disorder still. There's not a lot of understanding around it. So if you could just kind of explain some of your experience and what that's been like.
Yeah, so first of all, it's a fair amount of folks. 1 to 3% of the general population we think has bipolar disorder. For entrepreneurs, that number might be as high as 11%.
Wow.
So I like to joke to people now, if you have this condition and you want to build something, you're more likely to be successful, perhaps, if you have, some underlying neurodiversity. And for those of you out there who, who aren't familiar with it, basically it's a disorder of mood. Higher highs and lower lows. And we talk about startups already as a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is a condition that can actually make those highs even higher and those lows even lower, which is why it was such a challenge for me that I was unmedicated, I wasn't in treatment, I wasn't dealing with it, which made that roller coaster that much harder. And that's what I want to change. I don't want to have folks who are closeted with their mental health condition, not dealing with it, because candidly, this stuff is hard enough, Anyway.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you wrote a book, really putting it all out there. It's been a year since it was released. What has the response been?
I got to tell you, it's been amazing. Like, I always assumed this deep, dark secret that I internalized as some kind of unspeakable shame, right? Shame is what we can't talk about. I thought when I brought it forward that no one would want to work for me, that it would affect my friendships and personal relationships, that it would cause all these problems. What I found, in fact, is in the best possible way, no one was that focused on me, right? No one's thinking, I wonder what Andy Dunn's mental health status is. And so it's very freeing to realize that we carry these private, pains that once we surface, it was more of a big deal to me than it was to anyone else. And in fact, if anything, it invites other people in. That vulnerability draws them in, and now you can build an even more high-trust relationship when that's out on the table.
Yeah, and let's talk about your approach to business and how this has informed it. I mean, co-founder of a company that probably most of our viewers have heard of or own products from.
Yeah.
How does having this yourself impact how you manage, how you build a company?
Yeah.
What's it been like?
I mean, I think there's kind of the before and the after. The before, when you're, at least as I was in denial of having it. I spent 16 years between when I was diagnosed when I was 20, and at the age of 36, had this second really difficult psychotic episode. I spent a week in the hospital. That was the wake-up call. And I feel like life is kind of before and after. Before, it was out of control. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I was self-medicating with alcohol. It was kind of a crapshoot. And then afterwards, it's been, okay, now let me get focused on my health. That's seeing a doctor twice a week, taking medication every day. We have to deal with these things. And I feel like, for me now, I feel in a steadier place. I feel like I can endure more and longer as an entrepreneur since I have this regimen of mental health care.
So I know you are working on an app that's working to bring people together. Imagine this, in real life, in person. Talk about this and why it's so important.
Well, we have a mental health epidemic now around loneliness and social isolation. And the Surgeon General has talked about it recently. So our belief is we got to get people off their phones, off their sofas, in small groups together. So we're working on a new company called Pi, and it's all around this idea of let's decrease friction to small group hangouts.
All right.
Wow, so cool. You've got a lot of cool stuff coming right now that we'll be hearing and seeing from you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story both with us here and in this book. It's doing so much important stuff for everyone. Andy Dunn, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And if you need help finding treatment options for bipolar disorder yourself or any mental health concern, look at your screen right now. You can call the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration hotline. That is 1-800-662-HELP. You can also text 435748.
Coming up, preventing food hang-ups.
Yeah, with eating disorders on the rise among kids, but parents can help them. We'll tell you what they're saying you can do so your kids develop a healthy relationship with food. You are watching Morning News Now. Welcome back, and we have an ominous new warning about artificial intelligence.
Leading tech researchers and executives issued a stark one-sentence statement claiming there is a risk AI can lead humanity to extinction, you know, like the dinosaurs. NBC News technology correspondent Jake Ward joins us now with more on this. Jake, this is a sensational claim. The group is saying mitigating AI should be a global priority. What are the risks that they are most concerned about?
Well, that's right, you guys. This 22-word statement is broadly describing, you know, the science fiction movie that we have all seen, in which AI suddenly decides, why should I serve humanity any longer, and somehow breaks free of our control. Mitigating the risk of extinction, the statement says, should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. It's important to note, you guys, this is, of course, entirely theoretical. None of the technology that we are using, as convincing and amazing as it is right now, is anywhere near the kind of danger that's being talked about here. But it seems that 400 signatories felt it was important enough to get their names on something like this.
So, Jake, this is kind of what you're alluding to in terms of where the tech is actually at. But I think part of what is a little scary about this is the people who are signing this letter are the same people who created the tech they're warning about. We've also seen increasing instances of things like this. People who helped create this, like places Google, godfather of AI, quitting and saying, I'm worried about it. Do we need to be concerned about the alarm they're sounding at this point, or is this kind of them a good PR move to get ahead of this and say, hey, please regulate us?
It's a great question, Savannah, because there's this real cognitive dissonance here. You have these signatories, including, as you mentioned, Geoffrey Hinton, but also people like Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and top executives at Google and Microsoft, all of which are companies that are racing right now to get AI out as fast as possible, somehow also saying in this statement that we need to be worried about these long-term possible humanity-ending risks. So how do we square these two things? I mean, I think on the one hand, you have people essentially coming together and saying, I think we can all agree we should not be enslaved by robots. On the other hand, there's some short-term stuff here that nobody is agreed upon yet, and nobody in this group, at least among the people who are making money off AI, is saying we should hold back on producing more of it. And so it does feel at this moment, from even people that I've spoken to who signed this statement, like there's a little bit of talking out of two sides of one's mouth, but they felt that this was an important enough statement that they wanted to get their name on it anyway.
So, Jake, real quickly here, we keep hearing the warnings, but is anyone actually doing anything right now to control this risk of harm or misuse?
Where is regulation?
Well, it's important, Joe, that's right, to remember that here in the United States, we have almost none of that. In China right now, you have the right to challenge a company if AI decides that you didn't get a job and to turn off algorithmic recommendations. They have about 6 years worth of regulatory framework built around AI already. Here in the United States, because we do not have any data privacy laws, no data transparency laws, and now no regulations around AI, we have this wide open world, which is why some of the leading voices that are calling for regulation are the companies making it. It puts us all in a very strange position right now, Joe.
All right, Jake, we appreciate you keeping tabs on all this. Thank you so much.
Very much so, our in-house expert. All right, financial headlines now. Fidelity has marked down the value of Twitter for the third time since Elon Musk's takeover.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other money news. Silvana, good morning.
Joe, Savannah, good morning to you. Yes, so Fidelity says Twitter is now worth just a third of what Elon Musk paid for the social media platform last October. Fidelity recently marked down the value of its stake in Twitter. Musk has acknowledged he overpaid for the company, which he bought for $44 billion. And recently he said Twitter is worth less than half of that. It's unclear how Fidelity arrived at the new lower valuation. Delta Airlines is facing a proposed class action lawsuit over ads claiming the carrier is carbon neutral. The suit was filed on behalf of a California resident who bought tickets on Delta for, quote, more ecologically conscious air travel. The complaint alleges that Delta isn't living up to those ads, saying they lead consumers to believe the airline isn't responsible for releasing more carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Legal experts say the case will likely be challenging for the plaintiffs. Delta hasn't commented. Uber is dropping the 5% discount on eligible rides to members of its Uber One subscription service. Now, that's according to an email sent to customers. TechCrunch reports they'll now earn 6% of so-called Uber Cash on rides that can be spent on Uber and Uber Eats. Uber One costs $9.99 a month or $100 a year, and discounts have driven growth. The company says membership doubled last year to roughly 12 million, guys.
Wow. All right, Silvana, lots of good info there. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Here's some food for thought. How do you talk about food, dieting, and weight with your children?
Well, as more kids struggle with eating disorders, a growing number of experts say it's really about creating a positive relationship with food right at home. Today, co-anchor Jenna Bush-Hager has more.
Carrie Lou Poli, who's a mother of two, thought she had kept her former struggle with disordered eating a secret from her children.
We always had Friday family pizza night. My 5-year-old said to my 6-year-old, "Why does mom never eat the pizza?" And the other one said, "Because it has too many calories." That was sort of my wake-up call.
It's so interesting to think how modeling a good relationship with food is so crucial as parents.
I don't think that everybody's really aware of how prevalent this is and how much what we do at home and say can make a difference.
1 in 5 children show signs of disordered eating, such as calorie counting, food restricting, and over-exercising, according to a study published in JAMA Pediatrics this year. And it's more common among girls and older adolescents. So now a growing number of experts are urging parents to change the narrative at home to help foster a healthy relationship with food. Experts like family psychologist Dr. Jenny Yip.
Kids absorb everything. They really are paying attention to not just what they hear from us, what they see us do, because we are the first examples of how to behave in this world.
One way parents can set an example is to teach kids the value of food, says Carrie, who's now a certified nutrition coach.
We talk about it in terms of we need protein to fuel our muscles and we need carbs to fuel our brain and give us energy.
Experts also advise do not focus on weight. Do not restrict food. Kids will want it more. Don't use food as a reward. Simply offer everything in moderation. And do not call food good or bad.
If we eat something bad, we feel guilt. And that translates over. Food is not good or bad. It serves our body or it serves our soul. And we need both.
Our thanks to Jenna Bush-Hager for that story. Well, experts say while those conversations with children about food can be hard, it's very important to start fostering that healthy relationship with food early. Welcome back. The final splash occurred yesterday on Disneyland's famous ride Splash Mountain. The log ride closed down yesterday for a long-awaited remake. Get this, some fans waited as long as 220 minutes to catch a ride on the final day. Well, Splash Mountain was based on the old Disney film Song of the South, which features racist characters and stereotypes. So Disney's going to re-theme the ride based on the newer animated film The Princess and the Frog. The new ride will be called Tiana's Bayou Adventure. The Splash Mountain ride at Walt Disney World in Florida is also being redone. Well, you will be able to make a splash with Tiana in Disneyland in 2024. Joe, you're a Disney fan too, right?
Yeah, of course. I love Disney.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, something to look forward to. And in the meantime, you can sit in a kiddie pool and your kids can just splash you.
Yeah, I love it.
All right, that's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.